The year 1945 brought summer heat to Munich's devastated streets. 20-year-old Ingrid pressed against her apartment window. Glass fragments still clung to the frame from months of bombing. Below her, American soldiers moved in formation through debris-filled roads. Her fingers traced the edges of a worn photograph. Her husband's face stared back from better times. The Eastern Front had claimed his life 2 years ago. Now she held their baby daughter close to her chest. The child had never known her father. Ingrid watched the foreign uniforms march past. She could never have imagined what lay ahead. Within 18 months, she would cross an ocean. An American sergeant from Ohio would become her husband. Their child would rest in her arms as she sailed toward an unknown future. Her story echoed across Germany in those chaotic months. Thousands of women faced similar crossroads. The war's end had brought unexpected possibilities and forbidden connections. Between the German surrender and 1955, American soldiers fathered over 37,000 children with German women. Love had sprouted in the rubble of the Third Reich. War brides numbered between 14,000 and 20,000 during the decades spanning 1942 to 1952. These women would challenge military rules, social expectations, and racial barriers on both continents. Their marriages defied everything two nations thought they knew about love and loyalty. May 8, 1945, marked Germany's official surrender. American forces totaling 1.6 million stood on conquered soil. They had arrived as victorious armies facing a defeated enemy. What they discovered would reshape both countries in ways no one predicted. Military policy stated the rules clearly. No fraternization with German civilians. Period. Human loneliness and the complexities of occupation made enforcement nearly impossible. The policy would crumble within months. Allied troops had pushed deeper into German territory during the war's final phase. What they encountered defied every briefing they had received. Instead of fanatical Nazi resistance, they found a surprisingly welcoming population. Well-dressed women appeared everywhere. German men between 15 and 50 had virtually disappeared. This demographic reality created immediate tensions with military regulations. Dates and relationships developed by the thousands. War had devastated an entire generation of German males. Combat deaths numbered in the millions. Soviet prison camps held millions more. Survivors often returned wounded, traumatized, or never returned at all. Women, children, and elderly people dominated the remaining society. German women faced a dangerous new reality. Traditional support systems had collapsed entirely. Survival required navigating unfamiliar territory without the protection they had always known. Military planners had logical reasons for the non-fraternization policy. JCS 1067 implemented strict rules based on fears of werewolf fanatic attacks. American officials worried that friendly contact would undermine denazification efforts. They feared Nazi holdouts might use personal relationships to attack unsuspecting soldiers. The 1945 War Department training film explained these concerns to troops. Theodore Geisel wrote the script. Children knew him better as Dr. Seuss. Frank Capra directed the production. The film's title was Your Job in Germany. Its message left no room for interpretation. American hands had been killed and crippled by German hands. Soldiers must not clasp those same hands in friendship. The prohibition covered every aspect of human interaction. Handshakes were forbidden. Home visits were banned. Games and sports with Germans were prohibited. Gift exchanges could not occur. Social events remained off-limits. Walking in streets with Germans was not allowed. The regulations even extended to basic kindness. Soldiers could not smile at German children. Sharing candy rations was strictly forbidden. These rules assumed every German represented a potential threat. Reality on the ground told a different story. American soldiers found fraternization easy with most Germans they encountered. The expected fanatical Nazis seemed to have vanished. Instead, GIs met ordinary people struggling to survive total defeat. The contradiction was immediate and obvious. How could soldiers maintain hostile distance from people who seemed grateful for liberation from their own government? Private Richard Mullen captured the common sentiment. "It's hard for me not to smile back at them," he confessed. This feeling spread through the ranks rapidly. Young American men far from home felt natural loneliness. German civilians defied every negative stereotype they had been taught. The policy began crumbling almost from implementation. U.S. Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall directed Eisenhower to enforce non-fraternization orders more strictly. Enforcement proved nearly impossible in practice. GIs developed clever methods to circumvent restrictions. Some provided Allied uniforms for their German dates. Others forged documents claiming German women were displaced persons. Creative solutions emerged wherever regulations met human nature. Widespread violation of non-fraternization rules created impossible situations for military commanders. Soldiers with outstanding combat records accumulated disciplinary actions for being caught with German civilians. The policy was punishing good soldiers for basic human decency. Officers began questioning its wisdom. Health consequences of the policy became alarming. Annualized venereal disease rates rose from 50 per 1,000 soldiers to 190 cases in 3 months of occupation. By late 1945, rates exceeded 250 per 1,000. The fraternization prohibition probably discouraged soldiers from seeking prophylactic treatment. A policy meant to protect American soldiers was actually endangering their health. The situation for German women was even more complex. War's aftermath had left them in desperate circumstances. Official rations in the American zone provided barely 1,000 to 1,200 calories daily by spring 1946. Some areas probably received as little as 700 calories per day. Near-starvation conditions made relationships with well-supplied American soldiers often mean the difference between life and death. These weren't simply transactional arrangements. Many German women found themselves genuinely attracted to American soldiers. These young men from across the Atlantic represented something entirely different from what they had known. They brought tales of a country where democracy thrived. Opportunity existed for everyone there. The devastating war seemed like a distant memory in America. Americans were often struck by the resilience and dignity of German women trying to rebuild from nothing. Many soldiers wrote home about women who maintained composure and grace, despite losing everything. These weren't the fanatical Nazi supporters they had been warned about. They were ordinary people trying to survive extraordinary circumstances. Spring turned to summer in 1945. The contradictions inherent in the non-fraternization policy became impossible to ignore. The policy assumed all Germans were dangerous enemies requiring distance. Reality on the ground told a completely different story. The Germany American soldiers encountered was not a nation of hardened Nazis. It was a defeated people, primarily women and children, struggling to survive. The first crack in the policy came on June 11, 1945. General Dwight D. Eisenhower lifted the ban on American soldiers fraternizing with German children. The sight of American GIs refusing to acknowledge friendly children had become embarrassing to occupational authorities. How could America claim to represent democratic values while forbidding soldiers to show basic kindness to children? Children commonly approached Allied soldiers out of curiosity and knowing candy might be available. Expecting Allied soldiers to ignore friendly approaches from charming children was absurd from the beginning. The change regarding children opened a door that proved impossible to close. 1 month later, the policy relaxed further. July brought permission to speak with German adults in certain circumstances. American soldiers could now engage in conversation with German adults in public places. More intimate contact remained forbidden, but thousands of relationships had already formed in secret. American soldiers and German women had found ways to meet despite regulations. They gathered in bombed-out buildings. Parks, after dark, provided meeting places. Homes of sympathetic displaced persons offered cover for their meetings. Love could not be regulated by military decree. Relationships formed during this period were shaped by extraordinary circumstances of post-war Germany. For many German women, American soldiers represented not just romantic possibility, but a lifeline to survival. Americans had access to food, medicine, clothing, and other necessities desperately scarce in occupied Germany. Economic necessity led women to provide diverse services for American soldiers. Laundry and sewing were common. Working as household servants or in military posts provided income. Some women provided sexual services. In return, they received food gifts, ration cards, cigarettes, and chocolate for trading. Dismissing these relationships as purely economic would be serious oversimplification. Many couples who met during this period formed deep emotional bonds lasting lifetimes. They shared stories of homes and families. Dreams for the future were discussed openly. Soldiers far from home found emotional comfort and companionship. German women discovered hope for better futures through these relationships. The cultural exchange was profound. Through GIs, Germans tasted various foods for the first time. Peanuts, cinnamon gum, and toast bread were revelations. To most Germans, GIs lived luxurious lifestyles. They could buy whatever they wanted with plenty of food. They often talked about their American homes. For many Germans, their first real understanding of American life came through personal relationships. Soldiers spoke of a country where democracy functioned. People could speak freely there. Opportunity existed for those willing to work. It was stark contrast to propaganda about America they had received during Nazi years. American soldiers gained deeper understanding of what ordinary Germans had experienced during war. Many were surprised to learn most Germans had not been enthusiastic Nazi supporters. They had been caught up in events beyond their control. Conversations in secret meetings across occupied Germany helped both sides see each other as human beings rather than enemies. Summer gave way to autumn in 1945. The non-fraternization policy was clearly not just unenforceable, but counterproductive. September brought abandonment of the policy in Austria and Germany. The formal end of non-fraternization removed legal barriers. Social and institutional obstacles remained. Lifting the fraternization ban did not immediately solve all problems. Military authorities continued discouraging romantic relationships between soldiers and German women. Marriage remained forbidden. In earlier stages of American zone occupation, U.S. soldiers could not pay maintenance for children they admitted fathering. Doing so was considered aiding the enemy. This created cruel situations for women who became pregnant by American soldiers. They could receive no financial support from fathers. They faced social ostracism from their own communities. Many German women found themselves completely isolated. Their families and communities rejected them for relationships with occupying forces. Yet they could not receive support from American partners. Marriage bans created additional complications. Marriages between U.S. soldiers and Austrian women were not permitted until January 1946. German women had to wait until December 1946. Couples wishing to formalize relationships had to wait while facing pressure from military authorities. Some couples found creative ways around restrictions. Secret marriages occurred despite risks. Others gave birth to illegitimate children. Secret marriages were risky for both parties. Court-martial could result for soldiers. German women could lose all support if discovered. Social pressure on German women involved with American soldiers was intense. German nationalists disapproved of their countrywomen socializing with Americans. Women who socialized were ostracized. This forced them to interact more with Americans. Ostracism created vicious cycles. Women who most needed community support were cut off from it. This made them even more dependent on American partners. By November 1945, the reality of German-American relationships could no longer be ignored. A November 1945 survey revealed 56% of American soldiers had talked with German girls during the previous week. 25% spent 10 hours or more in such conversations. What began as strict prohibition had evolved into widespread acceptance of the inevitable. The transformation was remarkable. In less than 6 months, American policy evolved from complete prohibition to tacit acceptance of romantic relationships. The change reflected not just original policy failure, but growing recognition. German people were not the implacable enemies portrayed. Acceptance by military authorities was only the beginning of challenges these couples would face. The path from wartime romance to lasting marriage would be fraught with obstacles neither partner could fully anticipate. Cultural differences, family opposition, and bureaucratic barriers awaited. The complex immigration process would test relationships in unimaginable ways. As 1945 drew to a close, thousands of German women found themselves in love with American soldiers. Many were carrying their children. All faced uncertain futures. The men they loved would eventually return to America. The haunting question in every relationship was whether love could survive the Atlantic journey. Would American society accept German war brides into their communities? The stage was set for one of history's most remarkable mass migrations. Thousands of German women would leave everything familiar to follow their hearts to a country they had never seen. They carried within them hopes and fears of two nations trying to heal from war's devastation. What happened next would test not only individual relationship strength, it would test American society's capacity to embrace former enemies as family members. German women would need to adapt to completely new ways of life. They knew America only through stories told by men they loved. The real test was just beginning. December 12, 1946, brought the long-awaited telegram to a small Hamburg apartment. Maria had been living there with her infant son for months. The message was brief but life-changing. Marriage permission granted. Can you be ready in 2 weeks? Staff Sergeant James Thompson from Iowa had sent the telegram. He was her child's father, and the man she had fallen in love with during chaotic months following Germany's surrender. Maria held the telegram with trembling hands. In 2 weeks, she would leave everything she had ever known. She would travel to a country known only through stories. She would become an American war bride. Thousands of other German women were making the same terrifying, hopeful journey across the Atlantic. The path to this moment had been long and uncertain. When the military marriage ban was officially lifted in December 1946, it unleashed floods of pent-up desire among waiting couples. They had been hoping to legitimize their relationships for months. Obtaining marriage permission was only the first hurdle. It would prove to be an extraordinary test of love's endurance. The process was deliberately bureaucratic and intimidating. Military authorities continued placing restrictions on such unions. A 3-month waiting period was mandatory. Careful screening of German fiancés was required before marriage. Military authorities hoped delays and investigations would discourage relationships they still viewed as problematic. The screening process was thorough and often humiliating. German women underwent extensive background checks. They had to prove they had not been active Nazi supporters. Medical examinations were required to demonstrate health suitable for travel and marriage. Character references from community leaders were necessary. Evidence of moral fitness to become American wives was demanded. Many in the military and American public remained opposed to these marriages. Sentiment back home was mixed at best. Many Americans questioned whether women from the former enemy nation could be trusted. They wondered whether soldiers were making decisions based on loneliness rather than genuine love. For women involved, the screening process was a daily reminder of their precarious position. They were caught between two worlds, no longer fully German because of association with occupying forces. Not yet American either. Many described feeling in limbo while bureaucrats decided their fate. For those who persevered through the process, the reward was life-changing. Maria's story was typical of thousands. She had met James in spring 1946. He was billeted in a house near her family's damaged apartment. Their relationship began with small acts of kindness. He shared his rations with her elderly mother. She mended his uniform. Conversations in secret meetings across occupied Germany helped both sides see each other as human beings. For Maria and James, love grew from mutual respect and genuine affection. James spoke of his family's farm in Iowa. He described vast cornfields and a way of life that seemed impossibly peaceful. Someone who had lived through years of bombing and deprivation could barely imagine such tranquility. The pregnancy that resulted from their relationship in late 1946 forced them to confront reality. James could have walked away. Many soldiers did exactly that. Instead, he immediately applied for marriage permission. He began the long process of bringing Maria to America. The waiting period was agonizing for both. James faced pressure from commanding officers who questioned his judgment. Maria endured suspicion from neighbors who viewed her relationship with an American soldier as betrayal of German values. German women seen with African American soldiers faced threats, slurs, and ostracism. They were sometimes denied ration cards. While Maria was fortunate to be involved with a white soldier, avoiding some of the worst racial tensions, she still faced significant social pressure. Former neighbors whispered about her when she walked through Hamburg's ruins with her growing belly. Some shopkeepers refused to serve her when they learned of her relationship with an American. The experience of German women involved with African American soldiers was far more difficult. Mixed-race babies couldn't blend in anywhere. They were called Mischlingskinder, a derogatory term for biracial children. These women faced not only social ostracism, but active discrimination, making their lives nearly impossible. The approximately 5,000 mixed-race children born to German women and African American soldiers presented particular challenges. Both German society and American military authorities struggled with these situations. Having children out of wedlock was a social taboo at that time. It was nearly impossible for black GIs and German women to marry. The racial attitudes of the 1940s created additional barriers for interracial couples. A soldier needed permission from his commanding officer. When the request came from a black soldier to marry his pregnant German girlfriend, the answer was invariably no. This was followed by an immediate transfer. Systematic discrimination meant many African American soldiers were forced to abandon their German partners and children. Children of these relationships faced particular hardships. They were visibly different in a society with virtually no experience with racial diversity. They carried the stigma of being born outside marriage to mothers already socially ostracized. Many grew up in orphanages. Others lived with single mothers who struggled to provide without support from either German communities or absent American fathers. Some mixed-race children were eventually adopted by African American families in the United States through private initiatives. Mabel Grammer's adoption program was both praised and criticized. German social service officials felt there was insufficient vetting and oversight. The program was initiated by Mabel Grammer, an African American woman whose husband was stationed in Germany. She arranged adoption of several dozen mixed-race German children by African American families in the United States. Most brown babies in Germany were raised by their mothers or grandparents. Others remained in orphanages permanently. The vast majority of these children grew up in Germany. They often faced discrimination and identity questions that followed them throughout their lives. For white German women like Maria, the path to America was difficult but achievable. When marriage permission was finally granted, wedding ceremonies took place quickly and simply. Military regulations required marriages be performed by military chaplains. Ceremonies were often hurried affairs with little celebration. The next challenge was immigration itself. The War Brides Act of 1945 allowed servicemen's spouses to migrate without breaking quotas set by the 1924 Immigration Act. This legislation made it legally possible for German war brides to enter the United States. Practical challenges remained enormous nonetheless. The journey itself was daunting. Most war brides traveled on military transport ships. Conditions were often crowded with small children along. The Atlantic voyage took a week or more. Many women experienced seasickness while trying to care for infants and toddlers in cramped quarters. Maria's journey in January 1947 was typical of the experience. She boarded a converted troop transport in Bremen with 43 other German war brides. Their 67 children accompanied them on the voyage. The ship was not designed for families at all. Women had to improvise sleeping arrangements and childcare while dealing with rough winter seas. The psychological journey was even more challenging than the physical one. These women were leaving everything familiar behind them. Their language, culture, families, and homeland were being abandoned. They would start completely new lives in a country known only through their husbands' descriptions. Ellen and Lloyd were finally reunited in America in April 1946. They settled in Lloyd's Pennsylvania hometown successfully. For many couples, reunion after months of separation was both joyful and awkward. Men had returned to familiar surroundings. Women arrived as strangers in a strange land entirely. Cultural adjustment was profound for everyone involved. German war brides had to learn not just a new language. New social customs required mastering. New ways of shopping and cooking were necessary. New relationships with in-laws who might view them with suspicion or resentment had to be navigated. Many discovered their husbands behaved differently in their home environment than they had as soldiers in Germany. Reception from American communities varied dramatically across the country. In some places, German war brides were welcomed as symbols of America's victory and generosity. Local churches and women's organizations organized welcoming committees. They helped newer arrivals adjust to American life successfully. These communities took pride in their role, transforming former enemies into American citizens. In other communities, the reception was cold or openly hostile. Some Americans remained suspicious of Germans entirely. They questioned whether these women could truly be trusted. Others worried war brides would take jobs from American women. Some feared they would burden local social services unnecessarily. The economic reality of post-war America created additional challenges for many families. While the country was more prosperous than war-torn Germany, many returning soldiers faced difficulties finding work and housing. Adding a foreign wife and children to the equation sometimes created financial strain. This tested marriages already under cultural pressure from other sources. Language barriers created daily challenges extending far beyond simple communication problems. German war brides had to learn to navigate American bureaucracy successfully. Understanding legal requirements was essential. Communicating with doctors, teachers, and neighbors required constant effort. Many felt isolated and frustrated by their inability to express themselves fully in their adopted language. Children of these marriages faced their own unique challenges as well. Those born in Germany often struggled with identity questions. Were they German or American? They might face teasing at school about their mother's accents or different ways of doing things, yet they also had unique advantages. Growing up bilingual and bicultural was rare at that time. Such experiences would prove valuable throughout their lives. Some marriages thrived under these various pressures. Couples who had formed strong emotional bonds in Germany found their love could survive cultural adaptation challenges. These successful marriages often became bridges between communities. They helped change American attitudes towards Germans. They demonstrated that former enemies could become valued community members. Other marriages did not survive the accumulated stress. Divorce rates among war brides were higher than national averages. Couples discovered that romantic feelings developed during extraordinary circumstances of post-war Germany could not withstand ordinary pressures of American domestic life. The most successful adaptations often occurred when war brides found ways to maintain connections to German heritage. They embraced their new American identity simultaneously. They might cook German dishes for their American families. Teaching their children German songs was common. Maintaining correspondence with relatives back home provided crucial connections. Over time, many German war brides became some of America's most patriotic citizens. Perhaps this was because they had chosen their citizenship consciously rather than simply inheriting it. They had given up everything familiar to become Americans. That sacrifice made their new identity precious to them. The impact of this migration extended far beyond individual families. The arrival of thousands of German war brides in American communities during the late 1940s and early 1950s helped humanize Germans in American minds. These women became living proof that ordinary Germans had not been fanatical Nazis. They were people caught up in historical forces beyond their control. Children of these marriages grew up to become teachers, doctors, business owners, and community leaders. They carried within them stories of their mother's courage and their parents' love. This helped weave German threads into the fabric of American society permanently. By the mid-1950s, the wave of German war brides had largely ended. American occupation of Germany was winding down. Fewer soldiers were stationed there long enough to form lasting relationships. The impact of these marriages continued rippling through both societies. In Germany, the war brides phenomenon had demonstrated that reconciliation with former enemies was genuinely possible. Women who had left to become Americans were remembered not as traitors. They were pioneers who had helped rebuild the relationship between their homeland and adopted country. In America, successful integration of German war brides helped pave the way for changing attitudes towards immigration and intermarriage. These women had proved love could transcend national boundaries. Former enemies could become loyal Americans through personal transformation. The statistics tell part of this remarkable story. Between 14,000 and 20,000 German women immigrated to the United States as war brides between 1942 and 1952. More than 37,000 illegitimate children were born to German mothers and American fathers. This occurred in the decade following the war's end. Behind each number was a human story of courage, love, sacrifice, and hope. Maria Thompson had taken her husband's name, as was customary. She settled into life in rural Iowa successfully. She learned to cook American food gradually. Joining the local Lutheran church provided community connection. She raised 3 children who grew up speaking both German and English fluently. Her story was repeated thousands of times across America. German war brides found their places in communities from Maine to California. Some of these women never returned to Germany at all. They chose to make America their permanent home completely. Others maintained lifelong connections to their homeland. They visited regularly when possible. They helped maintain family relationships across the Atlantic Ocean. A few eventually returned to Germany after their children were grown. They found they could never fully belong to either country entirely. The legacy of German war brides extends beyond their individual stories significantly. They represent one of the first large-scale examples of how wartime enmity could be transformed into personal love and lasting peace. Their marriages helped lay foundations for the strong German-American alliance. This would develop during the Cold War years. Today, children and grandchildren of these marriages carry forward memory of their mother's courage and their parents' love. They serve as living reminders that even in humanity's most destructive war's aftermath, individual acts of love and courage could plant reconciliation seeds. These would grow into lasting peace over time. The story of German war brides and their American husbands demonstrates that history is not just about governments and armies. It is about individual human beings making choices about love, family, and belonging. In the ruins of post-war Germany, thousands of couples chose love over prejudice. They chose hope over fear in making these decisions. In doing so, they helped heal war's wounds in ways no treaty or policy could accomplish. Their legacy reminds us that peace is not just war's absence. It is the presence of human connections that transcend artificial boundaries of nationality, race, and ideology. In choosing each other, these couples chose better futures for both their nations and their children. They proved that love truly can conquer all obstacles.